But it it was time for the percussion to grow. I
Hmm.
mean, that we were ready for it. Composers began to see this, and before you know it, it's in the music.
Welcome to the back of the band room. My name is Trey Cross, and I have a very, very important guest today. This is Anthony Cirone. Yes, that's Cirone, Portraits in Rhythm. And beyond that, he put out so many educational materials. So I cannot believe I'm about to interview Mr. Cirone. We're going to talk about why he chose drums. We're going to talk about Portraits in Rhythm, of course. And hopefully we'll get a couple pointers for band directors from the man himself. So, all right. So I'm going to go ahead and bring him in here.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
All right, so let's dive in here. What was your first band director like?
Well, I was in band since grade school, and I didn't know much to tell you if he was good or bad or indifferent. I mean, then I went right into high school band. Connected with that, and my high school band director, William G., his name was, he told me that a good friend of his just got out of the Marine band and I should take lessons from him. So I did contact him, and so lessons were him trying to get me prepared to get into Juilliard because he was a Juilliard graduate. So that made the connection to the symphonic music for me because that's what I started learning with the Juilliard graduate. And then when I graduated high school, the Juilliard graduate told me to try to get into Juilliard. That's where he was from. And I did make some connections and I took the audition. And so then I was in Juilliard and I stayed there 6 years.
Wow.
I learned a lot of concert classical music. And that got my career going, really. I mean, because I was doing more than just teaching 4/4 and 2/4 and 3/4. Um, but that was the big thing for me is getting into that classical music. Then I was hearing classical music for 6 years. I wrote a lot of pieces when I was in Juilliard. I probably stole a lot from what I was hearing from concertos and concert piano things. So I had a good background with good, solid teachers, and that got me going in the business, really.
Hmm. I know it's been a while, but can you remember what your audition pieces were?
Not really. Not really. Part of the audition for Juilliard was I had to play for Jean Morel, who was the conductor. And he asked me to play a little tambourine. He was interested in when I put my tambourine down, don't let the jingles ring. Put it down quietly. That's what he was
Hmm. That's a great conductor lesson. That's
right.
awesome. Yeah. Cool. So in those 6 years, what kind of things were your teachers assigning you? If you can kind of look back, were you doing a lot of excerpt work at that point or just fundamentals?
What I was doing was learning how to read music. Basically, I was reading my lessons every week, and I went through the good books that we had then there. And I started writing my own books from very early in there.
Did you write Portraits in Rhythm while there or after?
No, while there in the 70s, I
Wow.
wrote it starting in the 70s because that's when I started hearing some of the newer percussion music, the books that I was using. And I realized there's a lot of difficult stuff out there, you know. And so that encouraged me to write some pieces. And I was writing them when I was studying with Saul Goodman, who was my main teacher in Juilliard. I would play some of them for him during a lesson or so. So he was kind of helping me. Whatever he was saying, I don't remember, but he was talking about it, and I played it for him. So that's where that's got started.
Was he jealous of any of the things you had written?
Well, not that he told me about it too much. No, he just helped. I think he gave me some good comments, probably, but nothing special. But he would just, well, this measure's wrong. You did this. You wrote that wrong. He would help me with my writing of it. But that's where that got started.
Were there any Saul Goodman isms that stick out to you? Anything that he told you in lessons that just is burned into your head?
Well, what's burned in my head is that when I'd had a lesson with him, he'd be sitting in the chair and he had the record player there, and he'd play the record. And then I would play it, and then he'd get mad. He said, "Give me those sticks." And he'd run up to me and here's how it goes. And he hit me on the back with his rhythm. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. He played the rhythm on my back. So he got excited when I was playing the wrong rhythms. He was a dedicated teacher, and he would teach you how to do it right. And he taught me how to interpret the character of the music. He knew the music in his ears. And so I learned the timpani excerpts that way, because he'd play that for me and he'd play it with this connection to the actual melodies. He did that in his head so it would fit. I wasn't just reading forte, piano, mezzo forte. And matter of fact, that was a big part in Portraits in Rhythm. I used a lot of dynamics and I used a lot of instructions that I saw in his music, and I would put those words in my snare drum book too. So I made a big deal of that later in life about reading music. We get allegro, we get moderato, we get accelerando, diminuendo, we get all those things. Not for snare drum music, though. We didn't get a lot of that in our snare drum music. But I started putting it in. Working through the first piece is allegro assai. So I asked the group, I say, how many of you can tell me what assai means? Nobody. They didn't look it up. Nobody to look it up. But that's the character of the allegro. So when I look up assai in the dictionary, Italian dictionary, it means much. That's all, much. In other words, more allegro. So that's simple enough. A little faster than allegro. You can interpret that. And that's what I make sure they would understand the character words. So they can add something that gives the piece character.
Yeah. And it's funny to me that you bring up the story of the Allegro Assai thing. I have kind of an embarrassing story that I never thought I'd be telling you. I went to audition for Jeff Moore. I think he was a student of yours. I was doing, I want to say number 3 out of that book. And it says Morendo in there. Yeah. And here's the funny thing, because I had gotten access to, YouTube recordings of people playing it, I played it properly. But he said, hey, what does Morendo mean? You knew I hadn't looked it up. So I like that you bring that up, because now with my older, wiser self, I always say, hey, man, you got your phone? Look that word up. There's a quote that says, an artist never finishes his work. He just abandons it. Have you ever heard that?
Well, maybe it's true, because last year I said I'm retiring for myself. Actually, what happened is I was writing a book and I spent about a year on this book. And I had an accident the year before that. And it hit my head and I lost my memory for a long time.
Wow.
But it came back, okay?
Good.
But what did not come back is that I already wrote this book. I wrote it. It was already published. So when I told the publisher I got this new book, he says, "Oh, we have one with that title. I can't do another one." I had to kind of redo the book, and I took another year and redid it. And I still haven't finished that.
Is there anything you've written that you wish you could just go back and tweak one bar of?
Well, I don't know if it's one bar of, but I know I have rewritten certain things. I've written percussion solos and duets, for different reasons, those years. But I did change things after I had written the piece. I would change things because I kept hearing all this new stuff they're giving to.
Cool. So why did you pick the drums in the first place? When did you first hear that siren song, the drums calling out and saying, Tony?
All I can tell you about that is my mother had me take lessons from our postman, who was a drummer. He was a kind of drum set player, But when she heard that, and here I was playing some of the drums in school, she told me to take lessons from him, and I did. And that was my beginning, with holding the sticks and stuff. But then I did start taking from other drummers in all lower school. And I think that got into the person who told me to take it from the one who graduated from the Marine band. it all connected. I mean, I
Yeah.
didn't have any empty spaces in there. And so I learned a lot those years.
Do you still play drum set or?
I really never played drum set.
Yeah. Okay.
I played right where the drums were, but I was not a jazz player. I
Mhm.
mean, I played for years in with clubs, and we played in for different concerts, and I did that. But I was really a classical player, and so that's just what happened
Mhm.
all of the time.
Are there any like standard pieces of repertoire that you loathe that you don't like to play?
Repertoire,
Sure.
not particularly. I don't think of anything that I love to play at all. I mean, I enjoyed playing it all, and I worked on it, and I had teachers teaching me, helping me.
What's something that you've seen in your students kind of over and over, a problem that you've seen, and how did you fix that problem?
Well, you know, the way we held the sticks then were basically the same way. And although there was not much of this, it was all this because we were coming from the rudimental approach. And
Mhm.
so I played like that, and my teachers played like that. And it was only a few years after that that I had a student come and play like this for me. And I didn't tell him not to play that way. I said, well, that's pretty good. Let's practice it. So it changed over time, and there was no reason why you play like this unless you were right-handed. And how you hold the drums. The drums are like this, so you like
Mhm.
this, this. It was convenient. It just happened, and I followed along the way they did it, and then I really never changed. I still played better this way than this way, and
Mhm.
all through my college years, I played that way. And yes, my students are all playing this way now, but I kept that up. So
That is actually something I did want to talk to you about. I judge all county here in Orlando sometimes, and obviously the audition material is yours.
mhm,
And I'll listen to 50 kids, and only one of them uses traditional, and he looks wrong. But you put out those videos of you talking about and playing the
yeah.
etudes on your website, and I was kind of floored, like, oh my gosh, he's using traditional. So that's just
Mhm.
purely out of habit, or
No, that's what I did for years, of course. All grade school, and I was started young, and I was playing this way, and no one ever played this way. I never saw anybody play this way, so I didn't either. And
Mhm.
then as I got older, was much older, not just in high school, people started doing this, turning their stick over, coming. And at first, I would tell them not to hold them that way, but then I realized, well, maybe it's okay to hold it that way. I tried it, but I was not as good that way.
Mhm.
So those that didn't wanted to do it, I just said, well, you have to practice enough to be able to play a big roll, a loud roll, open double stroke roll. And as long as you could do that, I mean, there should be no reason why you can't hold the sticks like that. It's just that's how it just kind of made itself. And then more and more people played like this. Years, it took years.
So I'm curious, who's on your Mount Rushmore for percussionist?
And yeah, no one ever asked me that question. All right, I know what you mean by it. Well, oh my gosh. I I had a lot of good teachers. Bill Laverack was one of them from Lyndhurst. He was told me how to hold the sticks properly, and then told me the grips, and the right way to make the roll. And so a few years with him, and then when I went to Juilliard, I had Saul Goodman, which was not a snare drummer, but he played snare drum like the regular snare drummers played. But he gave me a lot of music to learn. So, but that was my teacher there. Then, when I graduated, I just started teaching at San Jose State University and had my own classes, and I developed all my stuff in those years. So anyway, nothing more than that. I didn't have any real magician.
Yeah. Is there any drum set player that ever wowed you?
Oh well, sure. I mean, a lot of people. I played drum set with the group for years. We played in clubs and stuff, but it
Mhm.
was the '40s stuff. It was all the old songs, and I did a lot of brushes, and stuff. And I could do the cha cha and them or all those beats. But if you let me want me to solo for half an hour, I'd be lost. I never thought I was a real drum set player. I never studied with a real drum set player. I got a good classical education, both in high school and in college.
Mhm.
And kept me going. And by the time I was out of Juilliard, I think I had that book published.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but you must have been 30 or so, maybe a little younger.
No, younger than that. But
Wow.
I was getting into my early 30s. Yeah.
That's just so shocking to me that this Portraits in Rhythm, it's been so timeless. Because, you look at books from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even 90s, and a lot of it just didn't age well. But Portraits in Rhythm is going to age until the year
Well,
infinity,
well, you see, let me tell you a little thing about Portraits in Rhythm. When I studied snare drum, there was only a few books we used.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I studied, the books that were there. But it was time for the percussion to grow. I mean, that we were ready for it. Composers began to see this, and before you know it, it's in the music.
Yeah, and that book could have been called, 50 Etudes for Concert Snare Drum. Why Portraits in Rhythm?
Okay, well, yeah. I don't remember exactly why I called it that. I don't remember where the name came from. I know someone might have mentioned that name to me, and I like the idea of it. Portraits in Rhythm, not just Etude number 1.
Yeah.
So that somebody gave me that idea, but I knew I wanted to treat these pieces more like a solo piece, and not just a book of 4/4, 5/4, 6/4. Just it was all had to do with themes. I had to have an introduction, and then came the first theme, and then maybe a second theme, and then a repeat. And that's what they did in the music I was hearing. It was all about repetition, and I took it from what I was learning. So I added that, and that's why that book looks like a very classical book. But I was stealing all those time signatures from what I had learned.
Well, it's funny, I think the name adds to several of the things that make it so timeless.
Portraits in Rhythm is used all over the world.
It's all over the world.
In all universities. It's still been published, and they still use it. And I think it is timeless. It took me a couple of years to write 50 pieces, but I was learning a lot of stuff in those 50 pieces. And then I kept writing books.
Yeah.
And of course, then the other instruments became added on. Even the tambourine, early times I didn't use too much tambourine, but that worked in there. And
well, you had a book with Garwin Whaley and Neil Grover. I think it was Art of Percussion or Art of Auxiliary or something.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, those solos and duets are just great.
Yeah. Well, that's all coming from what I was learning in high school, and then he started the book, and he thought about it, and he knew what I was doing, and he called me and said he wanted to do this together or whatever we did. And I had a publisher to get it printed, and I had the influence of the people I'm studying with, and so it all came together.
I look at the long list of educational materials we have to choose from, and you, Garwin Whaley, Neil Grover, in particular, you three gentlemen, you put out so much stuff. And before you, George Hamilton Green, George Stone, do you see the passing of the torch these days?
Well, I taught a long time now, many years I've been teaching. I mean, I taught San Jose State for years. I graduated almost as a full-time professor, but I didn't teach full-time. I was always 3/4 time. By the time I was ready to graduate, I mean, I had more years in than most professors had in.
Yeah.
So I started so young. So I got the credit. Still, I got my pension from them. So, I mean, it was there a long time, and I kind of, many years I did this stuff and for students, 4 or 5 years at a time. They study when I was freshman, and so I had a lot of experience. And they were playing my Portraits in Rhythm with all of these musical directions, and they would get more and more subtle. First it was just fast, slow, moderate, diminuendo, and then I started playing like even I did a lot of when I would do my rolls. If it was just a roll, instead of just making a roll, I do a forte piano and crescendo and come down. In other words, I taught them to use their feelings with what it says. We sort of got, more composers began to do that. It caught on. we were the last in the bunch of instrumentalists to
Yeah.
use all of these terms, so to speak.
Isn't that interesting that we're the first instrument, besides maybe voice, but it took us until, the
Right.
probably the mid 50s to really blossom.
Yeah, no, that's right. Because we had a lot to learn in those
Mm.
years. We would have been playing musically and learning all those terms. We would have been doing that, but we just did it like it was telling us to do it. Nothing much there, And
Mhm.
so, yeah, no, that's a big part of what I did. I got to get all those words that have some meaning. Can't just be notes.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, the reason I asked that question about, passing that torch is I'm wondering if maybe Portraits in Rhythm is so good that we don't have the need anymore. You filled the need when you wrote that. And anything that comes out now would just kind of be an imitation. All right. So just one more. Percussionists are known for being maybe a little bit rambunctious. What is some trouble that you've gotten into in the back of the band room?
Well, I was not a troublemaker. If the conductor said play it faster, I'd play it faster. I wouldn't argue with them,
Yeah.
And but I would have my own idea before I even played it, of course. But the conductors have different ideas. They're not always looking for an interpretation. They may just be looking for volume or speed or something. Yeah, that's simple.
Yeah, man. And, just before we finish up here, I got to say, on behalf of just every drummer who takes this stuff seriously everywhere across the world at this point, thank you for the materials you put out. Thank you for being you. And if I had told, 16-year-old me that, hey, one day you're going to talk to Tony Cirone, I'd be like, no, you're not. That doesn't make sense. So I'm just overwhelmed and honored that you donate your time.
Well, you're welcome. And of course, I've done this for other people, and I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to give something back, that way.
And you've given back more than I think any any percussionist. I don't know if you've ever thought about it like that, but it seems that way to me. Yeah, I get more mileage. Everybody gets more mileage out of your stuff than any other thing in some ways.
That's good because that should be that way. It should get in their head. They should use those thoughts to make the music sound better, or just sound different.
Yeah, yeah, and just once again, thank you for this interview, and I really hope the percussionists and the band directors and the orchestral players and the history buffs, they all get a little. I progressed a lot after going through your books, and then 5 years later, I went through your books the right way, and I progressed even more.
All right, it's your turn. Look at the new composers, new ideas.
Big shoes to fill.
Well,
Like I said, man, I think you just knocked it out of the park, and we won't need another concert snare etude book for probably 200 years. By the time we're playing on jetpacks, maybe we'll need a new etude book. But all right, Mr. Cirone.
Thanks for calling. It's fun doing it.
Seriously, thank you. Like I am so humbled, and I appreciate you, man.
You're welcome.
All right, have a great night, sir.
Bye now.